All good with the shared screen?
All good, yes. Please take it away.
Thanks, Fernanda. I think I might be first up if Philip wouldn't mind moving to the first slide. And thank you for the opportunity for us to present this webinar to the Pulitzer Center's Ocean Reporting Network, hosted by the Pulitzer Center Ocean Reporting Network. We really believe in the work that you're doing. It's an area of reporting that's been often underrepresented and under-resourced in media. And so we're delighted to be able to share some of our capabilities that can support the growing need for more investigative and reporting around ocean issues. So a little bit about Global Fishing Watch before I hand over to Adele. We were founded in 2015 through a collaboration between three different organizations, the nonprofits Oceana and SkyTruth, and Google, who provide us with the much needed cloud computing power to do the work we do around revealing human activity at sea. In 2017, we were established as an independent international nonprofit organization and are now represented across the globe with around 100 staff distributed remotely. The next slide, please. So what do we exist for? Well, we create and publicly share knowledge, new knowledge about human activity at sea because we believe that information about the ocean should be common knowledge. We do this by using cutting-edge technology, such as machine learning, to turn satellite information and other big data into actionable information. And we share this freely and publicly through our platform, through our APIs, through our website to advance science and drive smarter ocean policies and practices. And critically, we promote greater transparency in fishing and other industrial activities at sea, along with our partner, Steve, on the line from Environmental Justice Foundation and a cohort of other organizations. We are advocating that governments share their vessel tracking data more publicly, along with other vital vessel information. Next slide, please. We have set out our strategy to 2030. We have three interlinked priorities that guide our work. One around our technology to advance mapping of all human activity at sea, I'll speak to in a moment. We work closely with governments. We believe in bringing solutions to governments and being needs-driven about how our open data can help them answer challenges with how they're monitoring and managing their ocean. And we urge them to be able to share their data through our platform as well. We also advance transparency in international policies and fora so that we create that enabling environment where countries are in a position to be able to mandate and drive greater transparency in vessel information. Next slide, please. You may know us through our map. We created the first near real-time public visualization of commercial fishing activity. Hopefully it'll play, but it's also on our website, globalfishingwatch.org/map. This is where we monitor about 20% of commercial fishing vessels, and a number of journalists use this regularly to be able to look at vessel behaviors, and Adele will speak to this more in a minute around the capabilities of our platform. Next slide, please. Most recently, last year, we were an awardee of the Audacious project. This is housed within TED, and this is a transformational investment in our technology that will allow us to monitor and map all commercial activity at sea, including industrial vessels, will allow us to also track hundreds of thousands of small-scale fishing boats and all large non-fishing vessels, so those involved in shipping or otherwise, as well as fixed infrastructure such as aquaculture and oil rigs. This is going to be an extraordinary platform that we're developing over the coming years, processing millions of gigabytes of satellite data and combining this with data from governments, scientists, and other sources, and it will be available through our platform openly and freely for everyone to use. And I'll hand over to the person in our organization who really knows what's powering this platform and how we're using it, and that's Adele. Over to you.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. And it's a pleasure to be here today. So my goal in the next few minutes is really to equip you with three main things. Firstly, to know what Global Fishing Watch has to offer in terms of supplementing your investigative work on fisheries and marine-related stories. I want to give you some pointers on where we get these data and how we generate it. And then I want to give you some guidance, which is basically the kind of small print on the back of the tin, as I think by bringing some of this upfront, it can save you a bit of time in the long run. So with that, Global Fishing Watch, as Sarah mentioned, is really very specialized in combining different vessel tracking and detection technologies. The main one we handle most of all is the AIS and VMS data. So you can think of these as data sets that allow you to track and understand the position of an individual vessel. The other data set types we have are satellite derived, and that comes from satellite imagery. And that includes optical, nightlight detection estimates, and radar or SAR. And so the main difference really to distinguish between these two big buckets of dataset types is that AIS and VMS can be considered as something similar to my GPS watch. If I go for a run, you can understand the route that I took, whereas the satellite imagery is really more like a snapshot. And so you can think about that as like a photographer on my run. If I happen to pass by as they take a shot, you'll get a detection as to whether I was there, but often it's not individually identifiable. But sometimes it can be if we stitch these data sets together. So these are the main data set types that we serve on our platform. Next slide, please. Thanks. And common across all of our tools or platforms are a few features. Firstly, they allow you to understand the sort of historic patterns of activity of vessels at sea. They provide up to near real-time estimates of activity. And due to our extremely talented front and back-end engineers and product managers, they're also extremely easy to use and accessible to anybody who has an internet connection. So listed here are our main platforms. We've got the Global Fishing Watch Map, Marine Manager, Vessel Viewer, and the Carrier Vessel Portal. But in brief, these tools will be relevant to your work if you're generally interested in understanding where vessels, fishing and otherwise, have been and which ports they're visiting, where they've been actively fishing, if they're fishing vessels, in relation to national and international boundaries and marine protected areas. If you want to understand the interactions between fishing and carrier vessels, for instance, if you're looking at seafood supply chains, and also if you want to understand the interactions between vessels and other data set types that you may choose to upload, because now with Marine Manager, we actually have the ability for people to upload data sets of their own, which is extremely powerful and useful. So by accessing the Global Fishing Watch platforms, you have a whole wealth of these different data set types and insights at your fingertips. Next slide, thanks. And the data that we share and make available includes a range of different things. We have estimates of fishing effort. We have a comprehensive vessel database that pulls and scrapes information from over 30 publicly available registries that contain information on fishing authorization. We have estimates of vessel detections, which is relevant if vessels are not present on AIS or VMS. We also estimate events, not just fishing events, but encounters, which give you an understanding as to whether vessels have an opportunity for transshipment or the movement of catch. And we collate all of these to generate insights, and we combine them with things like compliance history and authorization status to really understand individual vessels and what they're up to. And so common across most of our data set types is the information that we glean from AIS. So if you jump to the next slide. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on this in talking about this in a bit more detail, but AIS stands for Automatic Identification System. So this is a technology which is not new. It's been around for 20 years, and it was originally designed for ship-to-ship communication and as a collision avoidance system. So many ships have AIS devices on board, and they basically transmit a series of messages that contain information on things like vessel identity, vessel position, and speed. And Global Fishing Watch is very specialized in taking these messages and then using them to reconstruct a vessel track so that you can then identify or estimate the identity and the activity of a vessel. And so one of the strengths of AIS is that the pings are often frequent enough that you actually begin to understand and gain insights as to their behavior. Next slide, thanks. And so what that looks like is that if a fishing vessel has a very distinctive pattern, as is the case with trawlers, longliners, and purse seiners, for example, you can actually create these modeled estimates of whether a fishing vessel might be indeed fishing from its track. And as a general rule of thumb, if the pattern of movement and the gear use of a fishing vessel is discernible by the human eye, then the model will do pretty well at estimating it as well. Next slide, thanks. In terms of what that looks like, and how that actually happens is we use a form of machine learning, which is a type of AI. And that basically involves we have a whole library of hand-labeled tracks. So a human went through and labeled whether the track they think a fishing vessel was fishing or not from its pattern of movement in the track. That's then fed into the model, and then the model basically extracts common features that are common across multiple fishing events. So, for example, most of our strongest predictor for fishing is in fact vessel speed, if a vessel kind of slows down. And then this model is fed the new track segments as we receive them, and that then allows us to create these predictions of the new AIS signals as we're continuing receiving them. So the key takeaway here is that these are modeled estimates. Often it does extremely well, but sometimes it can be wrong, which leads me to the small print, which is the next slide. Thank you. So there's a few things that you should sort of be cautious about when you're handling our data and using our data for inference. And I'm sharing our lessons learned, which I think we've learned a little bit kind of the hard way. But basically, you should be wary of single points or very low estimates of fishing hours. So anything less than sort of 6 to 10 hours, for example. And this is because what I mentioned is one of the biggest predictors or strongest predictors for fishing is indeed sort of slowing down when the vessel slows down. And vessels also slow down when they enter port. And so for this reason, we often have false positives of fishing events as a vessel may enter port. So be cautious of those. The second thing is to be aware of activity that's right on the border or boundaries, for example, just on the inside of an exclusive economic zone. This is really to do with an artifact in how we kind of aggregate and summarize the data on the map and how we visualize it. And sometimes that can be actually just a sort of rounding up error onto the grid. So be kind of aware of those gridded estimates and make sure that if you're looking at activity that's right on the inside of the border, that you're kind of digging in a little bit and understanding the plot of the individual track of the vessel that's attributed to. And then finally, be aware of vessels that have kind of unclear or messy identities. As I mentioned, we pull vessel identity from the AIS pings that we receive, but also from a variety of different registries. But the import sources that we have are variable in quality, and so the quality of data that we produce is really just dependent on what we pull from. And also there can be kind of legitimate changes in identity that you will see. And so an example I experienced recently was I saw a vessel that was sort of transiting from Japan down into Australia. And I thought, oh, how interesting. This vessel is actively fishing in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, which is the biggest, probably best managed marine park in the world. And I looked into it a little bit further, and it turned out that the MMSI, so the number that was assigned to that vessel, had just been repurposed from a fishing vessel to a cargo vessel. So the lesson there is to always do your identity homework. Next slide, thanks. So there's a few more things that you should bear in mind when handling our AIS data and our data generally. They're all detailed in the explainers, which were linked in the slides, and hopefully we can share in the chat. They're listed here for you to consider, but for me, the key takeaway is we have a wealth of information and data available on the Global Fishing Watch platforms. If you spend a little bit of time understanding these nuances and the caveats of the data set, then they can be extremely helpful to supplement and complement your investigative work. But for now, I'll leave it there, and I look forward to the questions and hearing the other presentations. Thank you.
So I think it's me next, if that's right. Welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I can see a lot of people from around the world, and thank you to the Pulitzer Center and Fernanda and the team for hosting this and for inviting us to speak. I echo the words of colleagues from Global Fishing Watch about the need for this kind of event, and I think it is very important to communicate more about these issues on a wider platform. So great stuff. Really pleased to be here. What I want to try and do today is two things. First, I'm going to dive straight into what we actually do in the background of our investigations, and then show a short film, 5-minute film, that kind of illustrates the findings that we can get. Before doing that, just a couple of words about Environmental Justice Foundation. So we were founded 2 decades ago, thereabouts, specifically to work in the intersection of environmental security and crime and the associated human rights abuses and crimes. And I could say in more than 3 decades in working in this sector, nowhere have I seen more of a coming together of those two problems than in global fishing. where we've regularly documented forced bonded and slave labour, extreme violence, including murder, and extensive human trafficking to provide crews for the fishing vessels that are giving us our fish supper. So I think it's very important from our perspective, a mission-led view, to look not just at the management piece, the environmental, ecological piece, but also the human dimension to this, because there are crimes that are taking place on the water around the world that really are unpleasant, to put it mildly. So that said, quickly dive into what we do. So we employ a range of what I would characterize as integrated approaches to our investigations into IUU fishing. And what we're trying to do is bring together the best available intelligence and join the dots. Within that, there are two broad categories of work we undertake, usually with the same sequencing. Firstly, we always conduct a desk-based scoping that will involve a number of different elements, including literature reviews, analysis of fishing licenses and authorizations, study of legal frameworks, vessel and company searches, both in our systems and in external databases, and not least looking to establish flag state, corporate interests, and moreover, who the ultimate beneficial owner of any particular vessel or fishing operation is. On occasion, we may use freedom of information requests, liaison with local organisations in the geographies we're scoping, alongside a detailed study, more often than not, of supply chains, trade data, and next to that, social media scrapes, and simply histories of IUU and bad practice. Some vessels are well known, some operations are well known to be doing bad things again and again. We're also a big fan of Global Fishing Watch. I think it has already changed many things, given many opportunities, and I think as it continues to develop, could be game-changing, quite literally. So we make extensive use of Global Fishing Watch and also use other satellite technologies. We rely quite heavily on a system called the Starboard Vessel Tracking System, which provides us, like Global Fishing Watch, with real-time tracking of vessels, together with integrated vessel ownership information from S&P Global and information on authorizations based on regional fisheries management organizations, and a range of other features, including buoy tracking, transshipment or likely transshipment detection, and other anomalous behaviours. And between them, the Global Fishing Watch and our use of other technologies, you've got now an increasingly high impact and effective one-stop shop where you can find much of your data about vessels that are operating thousands of miles from site. So massively useful. Now, those activities, that desk-based research that we undertake, are in essence used to better enable us to guide and focus our field-based investigations, to analyse and mitigate security risks, and to determine, at least in part, what exactly we are looking for, which vessels, under which flags, supplying which companies, for which ports, and so on. And so engaging in the field work, we conduct investigations both on land and at sea. So on the water, in vessels, tracking other vessels as well as on land. Being in a boat can allow us to gain film and geotag photographs and other irrefutable evidence in real time of illegal activities of fishing vessels. And we've documented live transshipments this way that are illegal, along with fishing in prohibited areas, targeting protected species, using banned fishing gear, and so on. That is a very powerful part of our investigations, because the film is an enormously important tool for communication, not least to policymakers, fisheries management agencies, and indeed the commercial sector. We need to show people what is happening on the water, not just telling them. And once they can see the kind of abuses we're talking about, it does make, I think, the opportunity to drive action more probable. Then married to that, on land, we may document vessel unloading, sitting in ports, shipments and transport to better understand how illegal catch is being laundered into the market, who is buying and selling it, and to understand the nature of the full supply chain from net to plate. Again, all of which could be invaluable in driving the policy changes we want. On occasion, we do adopt undercover approaches, deliberately disguising our identity and purpose. But I won't go into that much now. But there's one overarching key point I want to make, and this is so important. It provides more data for us, at least, than just about anything else. And it's posing the simple question: if you want to know what's happening on sea, on a fishing boat, ask the crew. And we do this extensively. We've conducted over 850 direct crew interviews to gather testimony, and also often film from them of the crimes at sea that they're filming as they're working on those boats. And we've now reached a level of engagement with our crew contacts that the large majority of vessels we identify using Global Fishing Watch and other platforms as being of interest, we can find that we've actually interviewed or have contact with a crew member that has worked on that vessel. And it allows us to shortcut much of the investigation. So it's an invaluable resource. And you can take this same principle of talking to the workers into processing factories and plants and across and throughout the supply chain. Those are the people that see this day in, day out, that know what's going on. So I think at this point now, if I can show you the short 5-minute film, it documents some of the findings that we've had recently in an investigation in the Southwest Indian Ocean, where we were looking specifically at the Chinese distant water fleet. And I'd say one last point about this. You can find illegal fishing and some associated human rights abuses pretty much in every fishery, in every geography across the world, if you look hard enough. But nowhere have I seen a systemic abuse of both people and the environment of a larger, more high-impact degree than in the Chinese distant water fleet. It's not in one geography or one jurisdiction, it's in every geography and jurisdiction that we've come across. It wasn't in one vessel or one corporate entity, it was in virtually all of the vessels and every corporate identity that we studied belonging to the Chinese distant water fleet. And it's a key point. If we're going to tackle IUU fishing in the future, we must tackle China along with some of the other fleets that are still conducting this. So if I could ask now to play the film. Thank you.
Philip, can you pause really quickly on the video? I believe you need to unmute yourself so we can hear them. So.
Sorry about that. I can restart it.
Sure.
Chinese distant water fishing fleet is the largest in the world, with thousands of vessels operating across every ocean, catching millions of tons of fish every year. And it's become notorious in recent decades for widespread illegal fishing practices and severe human rights violations, with hundreds of Chinese vessels implicated in multiple regions across the world. Among the affected areas is the Southwest Indian Ocean, a biodiversity hotspot that's home to thousands of unique marine species and which supports millions of people who rely on the sea for food and income. For years, Chinese and local governments have promoted the socio-economic benefits of embracing Chinese investment in the region's fishing sector, proclaiming a zero-tolerance approach to illegal fishing. But instead of the promised prosperity and development, an investigation by the Environmental Justice Foundation has revealed human rights abuses and ecological harm on an industrial scale.
Sampai bahkan paksa dibunuh. Ya kan diambil giginya. Itu untuk kaptennya sendiri sih dijual ke, kan ada bisnis sama kapal temennya itu.
Ini kan daerah operasi mancing di sana juga populasi hiu cukup banyak.
Iya.
Atau misalnya kalau sini masih penangkap ikan hiu masih belum.
Banyak ya jenis hiunya kan yang masuk ke situ. Kalau nggak ada ikan tuna, ada hiunya semua. Kirimnya doang, badannya dibuang. Kayak gitu ya pastinya ya. Semuanya kayak gitu.
Bahkan lumba-lumba pernah dapat 2. Lumba-lumba dibunuh. Lumba-lumba. Iya. Pas posisi si kaptennya itu lagi kesel, ikan nggak dapat. Sekarang kerjanya ada yang 18 jam, kadang 19 jam. Dan banyak, kadang 22 jam sampai. Oh, kalau ini pertama kali saya kerja gulung-gulung nilon. Nggak pakai sarung tangan.
Kenapa nggak profesor umum?
Soalnya kan juga dibolehin sama dari terus tangan kosong katanya. 3 kali. Ini kaget dan kaget cuman kita di tengah laut terus. Ada salah satu ABK minta pulang sama kapten tuh, minta pulang terus nggak boleh. Udah nggak tahan mungkin karena ada pengaruh. Kita 3 minggu itu dia itu selama itu tuh dia tuh dilihatlah CCTV itu dicari itu kejadian sekitar jam berapa. Kita udah nampok.
For generations, coastal communities in Southwest Indian Ocean nations have depended on the sea. But the environmental and human toll of the Chinese distant water fleet in their waters now poses a serious threat to the blue economy here. To ensure that the region's fragile marine ecosystems are preserved and that human rights on board distant water fishing vessels are respected, the Chinese government must act now to enforce its own laws and introduce critical transparency measures to eradicate these systemic abuses across its fleet. Southwest Indian Ocean nations should also adopt increased transparency and sustainability measures to protect their waters and the people who depend on them.
All right. I suppose it's my turn, unless you have any closing words, Steve.
No, back to you. Thanks, Phil.
All right. Powerful stuff. Thanks everyone for coming to this webinar. It's wonderful to see so many people. I am an editor with Manga Bay on the Southeast Asia desk. We are a global environmental news site with around 50 journalists, 100 staff members in many countries around the world, fully remote, producing original reporting in English, Spanish, Portuguese in Brazil, French in Africa, Hindi, Indonesian. I'm also a Pulitzer Fellow with the inaugural cohort of the Ocean Reporting Network. I'm investigating the global shark trade for 1 year. So I'm going to explain in this presentation how a colleague and I reported a story about an illegal shark fin trafficking ring that was going on across the fleet of a major Chinese tuna fishing company. And following on from Steve's presentation, the key to our reporting for this story was our ability to track down and interview a large number of men who worked on this company's boats. So I'm going to explain how we found the men and how we approached interviewing them, how we extracted the information from the interviews that we needed to show what was going on aboard these vessels. This is the story. So first, a little bit of background. The company is called Dalian Ocean Fishing. It had 35 boats, longliners, fishing for tuna in international waters all over the world. These are high-tech vessels, ultra-low temperature, freezing capacity. The company's billed as China's biggest exporter of sashimi-grade tuna to Japan. Each one of these boats has senior crew members, the captain, the foreman, et cetera, who are Chinese nationals, and junior crew members, deckhands who are Southeast Asian, Indonesian, and Filipino. So by the time we came to this story, the company was already in the news. Indonesian crew members on one of its vessels, the Longqing 629, had been badly abused. They were overworked, worked for 18 hours a day or 2 days straight. On some occasions, they were given really meager food, possibly toxic drinking water from possibly faulty desalination machines. Many of the crew members, Indonesian crew members on this boat fell sick. 4 died. And then it was a big scandal covered by international news media. And in addition to the labor abuses, the surviving deckhands said that they had been made to engage in shark finning, which is when you pull a shark out of the water, cut off the fins, and then throw the rest of the shark back into the ocean. It's illegal pretty much everywhere. Some of the deckhands took photos with their cell phones on the boats, as you can see. This is one that was widely circulated when this story was being reported and covered by many media. So this was just one boat, right? The Longqing 629. But when we came to this story, we said, we want to try to find out what's going on across the company's entire operation, right? These 35 industrial scale vessels. And the fundamental question was the Longqing 629 a bad apple, or were these horrific practices, labor abuses, wildlife crimes, widespread and systematic across the fleet? So in order to do that, as Steve talked about as well, we had to find the men who worked on these boats, right, who were there. So how did we do that? I'm not going to go into a huge level of detail about this aspect in this presentation, but essentially we tracked them down on social media, on Facebook. We first got a crew list with the names of many of the Indonesian crew members and the boats they worked on, their birthdays. So that was a tremendous help in finding these men. There were lots of niggling little challenges that had to do with, navigating Facebook, understanding Indonesian internet slang, usage of Javanese on some of these Facebook profiles, profiles with abbreviated names or pseudonymous names. But fundamentally, a lot of this is adapting basic OSINT research techniques to the particular needs of this investigation. So in total, we identified Facebook profiles of around 70 former deckhands from this company, Dalian Ocean Fishing. We sent them messages, requested interviews. We ended up interviewing 16 of them from 12 of the company's boats. And in addition to that, EJF, which was doing its own exercise of tracking down deckhands from all different Chinese boats from many different companies, they had interviewed some deckhands from DOF boats. So they provided us with notes from the interviews with 11 more deckhands from 6 additional boats. So in total, we gathered testimony from more than half of this company's fleet, right? 18 of the company's 35 boats we had testimony from. So now we're beyond just one boat, right? We've got more than half the fleet. So, once we've got these guys, we had to figure out what to ask them. And there were a number of different aspects to this, but I'm going to focus here on sharks. So, actually we started off focused on labor abuses when we came to this story. And we put out a whole article about that. But as we talked to these deckhands, they often mentioned sharks and shark finning. So we wanted to pursue that as well. And it took us a while to figure out the right approach, right? So at first we just asked, was there shark finning on your boat? And they all said yes. But we soon realized that, we could go further than that, right? Because maybe, if they say yes, maybe it's one guy finned one shark on one day. Yes, there was shark finning. So we set out to find out, was this systematic? And if so, there were all sorts of questions about what that looked like. So, oops, sorry, it's not letting me go forward here for some reason. Oops. Sorry about that. Just give me 1 second to understand what's happening with the presentation. You know what? I've got this in another window and I'm going to share that instead. That's probably what's going on. Oh, nope, those are all gone too. All right, I'm going to go to this window. I'm going to do a new share to my desktop and go into this slideshow. Does everybody see? Everyone all good? All right, cool. So
all good.
Interviewing the deckhands. So once we had these guys, we had to figure out what to ask them. And so we want to know, was it systematic? So these were some of the questions, what was the scale of the operation? Who organized or profited from it? Was it the captains on the boat? Did it go all the way up to the company executives? Where did the fins end up? And then a number of other violations, using banned gear, were they targeting protected species? And then just, the mechanics of the operation, some color for our story. So again, for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the scale aspect. And, it wasn't as simple as just asking, how many sharks did you kill? They don't remember, not with any meaningful level of specificity. So, but what we found as we talked to them was that what some of them did remember was how many sacks of dried shark fins they've bagged up while they were at sea. So the way it kind of works was, they're harvesting shark fins all the time. And there's kind of a division of labor on these boats. And usually it's like one deckhand who's kind of in charge of weighing the shark fins and bagging them up. And what they told us was that, the senior crew members would instruct them to make sure each sack, weighed a certain amount. And it was different on every boat. But, the 12 boats that Mangabe interviewed people from, I think it was from 6 of the boats, we had people who pretty clearly remembered, roughly the number of containers or bundles or sacks of dried shark fins that they filled up, and then the average weight of each container. And, what would happen was every 3 months or every 6 months, the crew would move all the sacks of shark fins to another boat, which, by the way, was always another boat in the same fleet, which then took the shark fins to China. But that they were able to remember, roughly the number of sacks that they filled up. So once we realized that, we homed in on that, because when you get that data, it's very powerful, because if you have the number of sacks and how much each sack weighs, you can calculate the total weight of the fins, right? So once you have the total weight of the fins, there's a methodology for kind of coming up with an estimate for the total weight of the equivalent shark that was harvested. This methodology, it's published on the WWF's website. It's called the Sharkulator. So we use that. And so we have the 6 boats. There was 1 in the Atlantic, 5 in the Pacific. So what we did was we calculated that the 5 boats in the Pacific, these boats harvested about 5 tons between them of dried shark fin in 2019. And at the same time, China's government reported that its fishing fleet in the same ocean basin, its entire fishing fleet, caught 743 metric tons of whole shark, right? That's what China reported for its whole fishing fleet in this ocean basin. Using the Sharkulator methodology, the 5 metric tons of fin from these 5 boats translates to an estimated 843 metric tons of whole shark. So the finding is, we have 5 boats that harvested more shark than what China is reporting for its entire fleet in the same ocean basin, right? So, even if the estimates are, they're just that, they're estimates, but it points to underreporting, China underreporting its shark catch. And this is something that, experts we talked to had flagged even before we did these calculations. Countries all self-report their shark catch, I think, to the FAO, and China doesn't even appear, or at the time at least, on the list of top 20 shark catchers, which is kind of suspicious because China has the world's biggest shark fishing, the world's biggest fishing fleet, and the world's biggest market for shark fin. So for it not to appear on that top 20 list is, suspicious. So this finding kind of, is a pretty strong indication of the underreporting going on. And it's not to say China's the only one underreporting, but I think that was the most significant finding from the investigation. So this is a infographic we published just to visualize, here are the 6 boats, comparing the weight of the total shark harvested to Boeing airplanes, as you can see here, and then the shark fins as 5 small cars. The rest of it was thrown overboard. And then, here are just some photos produced by the deckhands that they took and shared with us, selection of species that they said they caught. But I'm gonna stop there. That's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all so much for these amazing presentations. We have questions popping into our Q&A button. Please continue sending them, and we'll start addressing them now. So the first one is for the Global Fishing Watch team. If a journalist enters the platform, what do you normally guide them? Like, what are the main aspects that they should be looking for? Is it the exclusive economic zone or a certain vessel, or what is a good way to start digging deep into the platform and the possibilities it offers?
Go ahead, Adele.
Okay. So I think one thing I recommend is if you've literally just got into the platform, definitely register for an account. That gives you then access to a greater level and depth of information. Then once you're on it, I recommend you hone in on a geography that you know a little bit of something about. You may have had a lead or something like that, and then just start kind of digging in, and because obviously our data sets give you kind of one lens, and it's quite a distance, data set that is observed from a distance. And so if you just start looking for interesting patterns in terms of who's active where, that can often be quite fascinating. And honestly, a way in which I have spent quite a lot of my time is just, it's amazing the data sets that are available there. So I just start kind of digging in, probably based in a geography that you already have of interest.
Great, thank you. Sarah, would you like to add anything?
Well, I've just point to the resources that you've seen Steve spoke to, that, there are a suite of tools that can really create a fuller picture, and Philip has put them to good use. We are one input into a suite of tools, from first-hand accounts to crew hands to other forms of data that are needed to bring in a really accurate 360 view. So we find it really helpful often if journalists come to us with a clear idea of something they're wanting to really look at. Either it's a particular vessel, it's a particular fleet, and it speaks to the data we have, right? We can see whether that vessel is using that AIS system Adele described, And what we have is historic information. So one of the things that's really powerful about our platform is to look back in time. Sometimes journalists want to say, you know, we heard reports that maybe there was an interesting encounter between boats at sort of this month or this time. I got some information on these vessels. Can you look it up? What does your data show? So sometimes it's very powerful in drawing a picture of what's happened in the past. And it can sometimes look at predicting perhaps vessel movement in the future. But it certainly helps us, you know, by all means, familiarize yourself with the map, dig around, as Adele said. But if you've really got a particular issue you're looking to look at, and Philip did this certainly with us in some collaboration, then we can hone in and say, right, this is where we have some insight around these particular vessels over this particular time period or this fleet activity. So yeah, what I would say is it's not, it can supplement information around potential suspicious activity, but it's not a IUU hunter, our map, right? It's near real-time tracking of commercial fishing vessels, and it can be an input that can inform suspicious activity that merits further investigation by journalists, which can be augmented or supplemented with these other sources of information that I think Steve and Philip have showcased well.
Thank you very much. There's another question, and I think that this one is more directed to Steve. It's asking, is there anything that I, as a concerned citizen, can do to help stop shark finning or any other threatened species?
It's a question that we often get asked, you know, what can I do as an individual? And people sometimes feel either disempowered or disenfranchised or simply not able to engage. There's no simple answers, but you can communicate this to the retailers that you use and the businesses that you use to say you want to know the origin of the fish that you're eating. You want to understand that it hasn't been caught in association with shark finning or the targeting of other protected or vulnerable species like turtles and whales and dolphins. And you can let them know that unless they can give you guarantees and the transparency that would underwrite those guarantees that their claims are true and correct, that you won't shop with them. It is, I'm afraid, pretty much as simple as use your wallet. The other thing you can do is your vote and your voice, if I can put it that way, is to be asking your government to make sure that they regulate and demand the transparency, and use your voice, speak up, say this is an issue that matters to you, that you want to be heard, and talk to people about it.
Thank you. Richard is asking a question that I think is more directed to Philip. It's surrounding shark fishing, shark finning, if it's happening across all geographies. And you explored Southeast Asia, but if you were to explore the theme like in Latin America, let's say, how would you go about it in kind of discovering the contextual evidence of that specific area and building up knowledge about shark finning?
Sure. So this particular company that we investigated, it was operating in international waters in all the major ocean basins, Pacific, Atlantic, Indian. So, you know, there's many reports about shark finning happening on the high seas. You know, today shark fishing is widely illegal. It doesn't mean it doesn't still happen, but there have been a lot of efforts, campaigns to stop the practice of shark finning. At the same time, there is a legal trade in shark fins. And in many places, there is legal fishing of sharks, you know, because every country has different rules. But, you know, there's a lot of aspects to the global shark trade. I mean, there's a rising trade in shark meat that is still very murky. It's something I'm looking into now. And there's, you know, targeted fishing of sharks in many places, which is quite often a gray area in the law. So it's not just about shark finning. I mean, after I reported this story, I was very interested to hear from people about, you know, experts about how, you know, actually the bigger threat to sharks today is arguably legal overfishing of sharks, which is often, you know, unregulated or underregulated. So there's many aspects to shark fishing and the global shark trade that I think deserve our attention, even beyond shark finning.
thank you. There's a question here that's talking about governance loopholes. So I think that this one is more for the Global Fishing Watch team and also for Steve. Do you all produce reports that kind of guide policymakers, and are those reports directed to policymakers, or are they also made publicly available? How do they work?
Okay. I'll go quickly on this one because I could talk all day about it. Yeah, yes, we do produce reports that specifically focus on policymakers and global governance, and they can all be found on our website if anybody's got the energy and the interest to look. The key point is that we need to change the architecture of global fisheries governance to do 2 or 3 things that would be transformative. And the first is deliver the transparency that we need. So you can see who is fishing what, where, when, and how. And that's where Global Fishing Watch comes in, making fishing data, making AIS and VMS data transparent on Global Fishing Watch, requiring that from your fishing fleets if you are a government would literally change the game in many, many cases. So there's a lot that can be done. There are huge gaps in this. There are some areas of seas and ocean that have no regulation at all at this moment in time. So it's a free-for-all, and it is thousands of miles from open site. People don't know what's going on. It's almost a license to conduct activities that are harmful and damaging. They may not be illegal, but they can still be harmful and damaging. And I think closing point that I would make about this is, I'm aware of fisheries that are 100% legal, but are totally unsustainable. And I think what we need to do is look at this through a science-based lens, manage our fisheries properly, make sure that they're transparent, make sure that governments are doing their job and the corporate sector is doing its job to make sure it doesn't take product that is illegal or fished with association with human rights abuses and other crimes. Then you have a resource there that provides food security, livelihoods, jobs, and well-being for billions of people on our planet. It is an essential resource. We need to manage it properly. So the question I answered earlier about what can I do? Vote, voice, wallet. Speak up, be heard, and make sure your government hears you.
And if I can just add to what Steve said, which was, absolutely our position and a shared view we have around transparency. And I think we would say that beyond establishing those norms in policies and practices around transparency, you've got to monitor and enforce them at sea. And this is an area that, many countries struggle with. Many countries want to be able to better police and patrol their waters, but they don't simply have the resources to do so. The ocean is vast. There are not enough countries with enough patrol boats to be having eyes on the water at every given moment. And this is where we do see the power and potential of the technology that Adele spoke to, where we're working with governments to be able to harness these virtual means, these digital means of being able to monitor and predict risk of potential suspicious or rogue behaviour by vessels. And importantly, working with governments to help them better target patrols so that those do have the assets on the water, can use the power of big data through our map to be able to target where best to place their assets on the water with a higher likelihood of being able to intercept poor actors at sea. But importantly, it's not just a stick, it's a carrot as well, transparency. If we can get a more transparent model for ocean governance and management, it should reward the good actors. Corporates should want to only buy from vessels and companies that are transparent about where they get their fish from and which vessels and where they can be seen. And at ports, these are really strangle points where fish has to be landed somewhere. So those ports are important places where legal and illegal catch can be transported. Let's get those responsible players in and out of ports quickly. Let's make their life better, those who are committed to transparency, and let's support those authorities at ports to use technology to be able to identify those actors that need further investigation. So we see it as an important movement with transparency to both identify bad behaviour, but critically reward those responsible actors who want to deliver legal, sustainable and ethical fish to our plates.
Great, thank you. There's another question in the chat that's talking about trade, right? And I think I can briefly address that question. It's talking about how do we start if we want to investigate the shark fin trade? There is a portal that I use a lot for the Pulitzer Center and Research that's called Comtrade. It's assembled by the UN. So each product that is commercialized, basically traded, it has an HS code. So same goes for shark fin, same goes for algae, tuna, you name it. And there you can see kind of what Brazil reports to the UN that it's trading shark fins with China or any other country. So, and this you can Google very simply, like HS code shark fin or any other part that you're interested in. So that's a really good starting point. And now I'm going to invite all of our panelists to just say closing remarks so we can finish the panel. Maybe you guys can popcorn to each other, starting with Philip.
Well, it's great to see so much interest and attendance at this webinar. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe just to address the last question about investigating the shark fin trade. It's a good question. There's a lot of questions that arise around this too. I mean, should shark fishing be legal? Should the shark fin trade be legal? Can it be sustainable? These are questions that people are grappling with in a lot of different countries around the world, and there's people on both sides of these issues. So, as a journalist, starting to look at some of these debates that are happening, some of these political battles that are happening, because there are political battles over sharks in many countries around the world, and it's very interesting. It's something I'm looking at in my current project with the Pulitzer Center's ORN. So, articles to be published in the next few months about some of the things that I've talked about. So if you're interested, watch this space. You can find the stuff on Mongabay. It's been a great experience working with the Pulitzer Center as part of this fellowship. Just an incredible opportunity to focus in on one issue and really go deep on it. So I'm very thankful for that.
Maybe Adele and Sarah can go now because I know that you two are on the clock.
Great. Yeah, and I would finish by saying I think blending mixed data types, so the remotely observed data that we have with the tracking data and the deep form investigation that the people who are dialing in have the skills in can be extremely powerful. And I look forward to seeing the stories that come out that do just that.
Yeah, we're really excited to support journalists who are interested in reporting on what happens at sea, because what happens at sea doesn't stay at sea. This is about people's livelihoods and well-being on land. This is about abuses that do happen at sea that do go unseen. And that's my dog squeaking toy, apologies. We're just excited to continue to collaborate with the Environmental Justice Foundation and through the Coalition for Fisheries Transparency. We'd invite the journalists to check out that site. There's a cohort of nonprofits that bring different disciplines and expertise to help look at transparency and some of the issues we see at sea. So we very much believe better together, whether that's blended data, as Adele said, or working with a suite of other actors. We can certainly support journalists in pointing to the resources and the different groups that can bring the necessary insight to strengthen reporting on issues that happen in the ocean. Over to you, Steve.
So thank you, and quickly echo what Sarah, Adele, and Philip have just said. I support all of those words, and say one other thing. There is this might sound a bit cliched, but it is the truth. We do live on a blue planet. We have an active shared interest in looking after our sea and ocean. This amazing global ecosystem produces more oxygen than all the world's forests. It takes in most of the anthropogenic carbon dioxide. And as I mentioned earlier, it provides food security, jobs and livelihoods for so many of us. And the wonderful thing about fisheries is if you look after them properly, if you manage them properly, they keep on giving. They are our future. They underwrite our well-being, our global economy in so many different ways. So we've all got an interest. We need to do this and finish on the piece about how we do that. Transparency won't solve these crimes and these abuses, but it's a fundamentally valuable tool of massive utility if we do it right, if we engage, that will keep on giving. So let's get it on Global Fishing Watch. Let's make the data transparent. Let's give everybody the chance to see what's really going on, and then we can take some clever decisions about what needs to be done.
Great, an amazing ending note. Thank you all so much for the presentations. Thank you for our audience for participating today. I will be sending the slides and all relevant links to everybody's email. And thanks again. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay.